Okay, testing, Brian. Hi, this is episode 61, just so you're aware.
Good evening, Brian.
But you'll know that by the text you're about to get in about an hour's time to say, oh, sorry, could you do this one quickly because it's due next week? Right, so episode 61. We're coming to the end of the road, right?
Well, yes, the end of this road.
Okay, hello everyone and welcome back to the Tokyo Jazz Joints podcast. This is episode 61. I can hear James smacking in my ears already, even before I finished the intro. James, are you on the beers already? It feels like you probably are.
That's definitely some peripheral noise because I was completely still during your otherwise stirring introduction.
Yes.
I'm pretty good, man. How are you? Where are you? You're still doing a lot of your world traveling, I know, for the book and other things, but recording back home today in Belfast, yes?
Recording in Belfast. If Scott's Jazz Club in Belfast is to be believed, they put up a post about this European book tour, which sounded very grand. And then I tried to explain it as being in a few different European countries and promoting the book, which just made it sound exactly like a European book tour, but it was nothing as grand as that. But I was in Germany. I can't, honestly, it's funny because when you listen back to some of the episodes, I know that we're slightly out of sync with real time because we're not recording this and then putting it out the following week. But great to be in Helsinki. I was over there doing a bit of work and stayed on for a few days and finally got to meet Matti and Ami from We Jazz Magazine, who run We Jazz Magazine, and went down to Degelius Music, which is an interesting place. So Degelius Music apparently is a really legendary shop in Helsinki. And funny enough, in a strange synchronicity with jazz joints and things like that, it actually closed. Well, I think the owner passed away or gave it up, and it was then taken over by someone else and kind of declined a bit. I think it was well known for having like a lot of jazz and a lot of world music, and being a really like specific kind of collector's type shop. So interestingly, We Jazz have moved. They've kept the name. They still have the old original sign in the shop, and they've moved up to a slightly different area in Helsinki. And a lot of the We Jazz records are in there now, as well as a whole other selection of records. So they've closed their shop. They still have their office where it was originally, and now the shop's moved to Degelius. So got down there, did a little signing, met a couple of lovely people. One named Jesse, very nice man who came. Bought a copy of the book and had a bit of a chat with him. So that was great. And then last week over in Germany, in Mannheim, at the unbelievable Enjoy Jazz Festival, James, I tell you what, like next year, honestly, it's been going 25 years. It runs for 5 weeks, which to me just seems like a staggering length of time for any kind of festival. But I think you would have loved it. I
think it's one of the longest. I know the Montreal. That's pretty much an entire summer long in Montreal, but made up of a couple of different festivals. But yeah, 5. When you sent me some of the pics and were like, this is going on for weeks longer, I was kind of like, wait, what? Why have I not heard of this? Actually, I'm surprised I hadn't heard of it before, but it looked absolutely amazing.
It's been going 25 years.
I wanted to ask you about the record store because it's really interesting. You were saying that especially about how the ownership sort of situation and the change, because I had a little trip myself a few weeks back to Southern California, not really jazz related. It was some family things, but you know me, I got to sneak off to a couple of record stores. And so I was able to get to the legendary Puba Records in Pasadena, which has been open since the 70s. And a friend of mine here in Japan used to work there actually in the late 70s when he was living in LA. So he told me, you got to go by there. And it was almost exactly a similar situation. The original owner kind of got old. He got disillusioned with the record business and he was just going to shut it down. And this is one of the maybe, most famous record stores in all of Southern California. But luckily, a new owner came around, not only purchased all of the stock, but agreed to sort of keep the vibe of the place. And Philip, yet again, amazing. We start chatting with the young guy that's working there, and it comes out that, my friend's opening a place in Northern California, and I live in Japan. He's like, oh, Japan. Yeah, I mean, you must know about all those jazz kisa then. Philip, I kid you not. This is like the first thing that he says.
You're like, no, tell me, like, tell me more. Tell me more.
Just a wee bit. And then, so of course my buddy is like, does he know? Are you kidding? Like this guy, he's put out a book. And the guy goes like, oh, I know that. I've seen that online. Like that's great. I want to get a copy. So even when we walk into these random record stores and get that sort of, awareness of what we've been doing, it was really, really awesome, because it's certainly not what I was expecting. I mean, I know that we have a lot of people in the States that have been contacting us about getting the books, but maybe not so many record stores, So hopefully with our next round of printing, we can get a couple copies there.
Well, look, definitely. I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, just to go back to the Enjoy Jazz, because I met the owner of the festival, who again said some very lovely things about the book. But they set up a great listening event, which actually was kind of in conjunction with a hi-fi store in the city of Mannheim. And I think you would have appreciated it, because they brought along some heavy duty equipment from stuff that we've seen. I think, I can't remember where the turntable is, and apologies to the audiophiles, but it's, one of those turntables that has the kind of glowing blue plate. And I think he said it was about 14 grand for the thing. They brought along a record cleaner that was 5 grand alone. And I was not allowed to play any records until they'd been thoroughly cleaned. And then, as part of the listening event, there was someone from the hi-fi shop. So he had these white gloves on, like a Japanese taxi driver, and only he turned up the volume, turned the volume down, put the needle on the record. And I just gave him the records with a Post-it, said, can you put on track 2? Introduced the track, talked a little bit about the project. And it was just a really nice chance to kind of enjoy music in that setting. But fantastic festival. I told you, like, the Ornette Coleman tribute concert on the Saturday night as well was incredible. So yeah, massive shout out to Enjoy Jazz Festival, to Reiner, not owner, what's the word? It's like a ship's helm thing. The organizer. The organizer of the festival. He's the ship's wheel. He's the ship's wheel of the festival. And big shout out to Henning, who helped bring me over, Dennis as well. And a massive shout out to Ulrich as well, James, because met a German journalist. Met a German journalist called... I know, right? And also big shout out to Ulrich, who is a German jazz journalist that I met, and he's going to do a piece about the project in Jazz Podium, which I believe is Germany's oldest jazz magazine.
Wonderful.
So that'll be nice as well.
That is superb. Well, look, things are moving, man, and I mean, we have more news coming, which we can save for a little bit later. But we do still have, I believe, we've got 2 more episodes to document from your trip here in April. Is that correct? We've got today, and then next episode will be the finale before you finished up to fly back. Is that right? But like quite a few more.
Yeah. So
6 or 7.
Yeah, we have. I mean, it's a mixed bag. So this is kind of always one of these interesting bits of these trips, right? Because sometimes we're together, sometimes we're apart, sometimes I'm going to places that you've been, sometimes it's other places that you haven't made it to yet. And so I think it's always interesting to kind of do some of these episodes as well. But we left it in Osaka, and actually that's after Jazz and a good dinner in Koreatown, we parted ways on the Monday morning. I think we got off pretty early because we were jumping on the Shinkansen down to Okayama to get the boat over to Shikoku. Now, what do we know about Shikoku, or what do we not know about Shikoku, rather? Well, would probably be more accurate.
It's interesting. I mean, we know a lot of feedback from our listeners and friends and people who visited Japan many times, but Shikoku is sort of the forgotten of the 4 major islands. It's the smallest of the 4, and I think it's a place that's not visited nearly as much as, obviously, Honshu, but even Hokkaido and Kyushu, which is a real shame because it's got its own unique, special culture to it. Probably the most famous thing is it has a 1,200-kilometer long Buddhist pilgrimage route where, from the way old days, pilgrims would walk through the 88 temples, walk by foot all around the island. And, if you've been to Japan, all the islands are extremely mountainous. So this is a very strenuous pilgrimage, and some people still do, actually, ever since the 9th century. And then the great port town of Takamatsu, which is right across the bridge from Okayama City, is the capital of Kagawa Prefecture, very well known for being the udon prefecture of Japan. Do you like udon noodles, Philip?
I'm not a fan of udon, actually. I think they're a bit fat for me.
I prefer soba myself.
Don't love an udon.
If you visit Kagawa, you've got to have it at least a couple times. So, actually, it was 2 years ago, 2 summers ago, Philip, that I was down there because I was down there doing some research for a non-jazz related article. But of course, you know me, if I'm down there, I'm going to find some jazz cafes. So I met up with a Japanese, actually jazz drummer friend of mine. Shout out to Masashi Tomikawa-san, who is from Kagawa Prefecture. He had lived in New York for many years, but he returned to Japan. So we met up, and I said, look, I want to go to this place called Uptown, which is a really old kisaten. But Philip, I don't think I did my full research properly because I was sort of on assignment for this other article, because I know that you actually found a couple other places that I did not hit in Takamatsu, sadly.
Well, yeah, there's quite a few. See, like, I don't really know Shikoku. In fact, this is, in 20 years, is the first time I'd ever made it to Shikoku. And it's funny because it's one of those places, like, and I think you have this in every country. Like, if someone's from England and they say to me, oh, I'm from somewhere like, I don't know, Colchester. Sorry to anyone who lives in Colchester. You sort of go, oh, yeah. Like, and obviously you know the name, but like, I could not put it on a map, right? Without looking at a map and looking it up. And Shikoku is one of those places, I think, where people are like, you would have met people over the years and they're like, oh yeah, I'm from like Matsuyama, I'm from Takamatsu. And you sort of go, oh, right. And like, I think part of me was like, and like a lot of Japanese place names can be quite similar. Like there's quite a lot of Matsus, there's quite a lot of Yamas,
and I think it's also that people would have heard, because, you and I had heard the same thing with me. I'd only been there for the first time about 5-6 years ago, but everybody in Japan has heard of like the folktale of Momotaro, the Peach Boy, which comes from Shikoku Island, or Dogo Onsen, which was one of the models for the hot springs in Miyazaki's movie Spirited Away. So people know these sort of things from the island, whether Japanese or overseas tourists, but like you said, not a lot of people actually spend time there.
Yeah, and actually Dogo is onsen was where we went and stayed that night. So it was a kind of a dash to Okayama and to get over to pick up a hire car, because again, like I wanted to combine a little bit of tourism and holiday making with going to some jazz places too. So we made it over to Takamatsu, picked up the car. And as you said, the plan was to go to Uptown. So I made a beeline for Uptown, actually, and it was closed. Well, I say it was closed. So I went to Uptown, and there was a man reading a paper in a window. So I kind of popped my head round and said, oh, good morning, just came to hang out, I was hoping maybe we could come in and have it. And it was like, no, sorry, I'm not open till, I think it was 11 or something like that. So, and it was very much, James, like we've been in these situations, and we talked about jazz last week. Like sometimes you know when to push, and other times you're like, okay, that's fine. This is not happening. So we actually went off and wandered. And I think what was striking about Takamatsu, it had what felt like miles and miles of those kind of Shotengai streets.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Like, unbelievable. Well, and like walking back in time sometimes.
It's for two reasons, because it is so stinking hot there in the summertime, but it also has a lot of rainfall. So, they put these very high sort of like clear to let the sun in,
gotcha.
But it does keep it a little cooler. And yeah, definitely a lot of those streets and shops not pretty much unchanged since the late 60s. You can tell there's kind of family run sort of like Western clothing shops, that like everything looks like it's like for 80-year-old Japanese men, sweaters, your kind of stuff, Philip. You dig that retro stuff, not me, but
definitely my look.
But definitely, I noticed that too, because when I think Uptown is sort of just a little bit off of one of those main Shotengai shopping streets.
Yeah, it was so we kind of actually walked around the corner, and weirdly, I actually cannot remember now, to be perfectly honest, if I had the name even, or whether I just stumbled on it on this show guy, but quite literally round the corner was a place called Mimosa Bird. And it says on the sign, used jazz/used LPs. But when you look up, it just doesn't look like a record shop. So it's on the Shotengai, and it's like literally around the corner from Uptown. So we went up.
Yes, I do.
Do you know the place I mean?
Yes, I remember because, okay, yes, I'm looking back through my notes from 2 years ago in my diary. And good friend of the show, Plain Stone, my great buddy here in Tokyo, who collects a lot of records, he actually told me about that. And he said, look, it's a record shop, but it's also a cafe, so try to get there. But they were closed.
Well, it's actually not a record shop anymore, which was kind of the interesting thing. So what happened was, it actually says record cafe. So it's sort of, I suppose it says both, but we went up and it was not in any shape or form really recognizable as what you would, or what we would think of as a jazz kisa, but also clearly a jazz place. So we went in, and again, it's becoming a theme on this trip, but they were getting ready for what looked like was going to be a very busy lunch service, right? So there was you came in on the left, and it was quite clean, the space. Like there wasn't much on the walls. There was like a couple of album covers. There was a poster of Miles and stuff like that. And when you come in on the left, there was a counter where people were very busy, and it was full. Like there was older people all sitting at the counter having coffee and having food. And then to the left, where what used to be, I later found out, the record shop space had all been cleared, and it just had almost like trestle tables, like not non-permanent tables kind of set up. And all of them had the places laid, for like a lunch kind of service. And it was really weird. And like the owner was sort of sat in between these two things was the cash register, and he was sat in behind them. So we just went in, and like as we do, and you kind of go in and kind of figure out, right, okay, well, what's the crack here? Like, is this a place at all? Like, am I going to be able to photograph? Like, all those kind of things. So we ordered a coffee, which in itself felt like a kind of an odd thing to do, because people were just getting tucked into like full lunches at this point. I'll give you some hints. I'll give you some hits there, James. There's there's a nice Buddha, a nice pork and bean sprout onion sauce. You would like that, right? What about a chicken mayonnaise miso yaki?
Oh,
what about that?
Lord, please stop.
No.
Going behind the curtain, I've just come from a very, very heavy grilled Korean barbecue birthday dinner for my son. So the last thing I want to do is hear about jazz kiseten chicken and mayonnaise. That just
you don't want to want a pork and eggplant with oyster sauce. No. Anyway, that's just some of the menus that were coming up that week. But look, it looked very nice. Like probably pretty decent food. Full set. You get your rice, you get your miso soup, you get your pickles, all the usual sort of stuff. But there wasn't really too much trace of jazz. So as we sat there and had the coffee, I kind of called over to the owner and said, I'm just curious, it says record shop, and he was actually very nice. Once we got talking, we started to chat, and he told me that it's the 16th year it's been there, and actually it was a record shop and a cafe until 2021, and then they switched over to become a lunch place. And there isn't really too much more to say about it. I mean, I took some photographs, which, eventually will go up on tokyojazzstories.com. It obviously has that footprint as a jazz cafe. But like, again, 2021, I suppose, is a significant year in terms of maybe customers and COVID and all those things. And for whatever reason, I think he just wasn't feeling the record shop thing, whether he was making any money off it or not. I mean, we all know, like, being in a record shop business is pretty competitive, especially these days with the internet and stuff like that. So they switched over, and I mean, I would say, based on the amount of tables, doing a pretty roaring trade for lunch. I mean, there was a lot of places laid out. Like, I would say they were doing 20, 30 covers there for lunch. And the master seemed sort of resigned to what it was. And he was very pleased that I was asking, I think, he's sort of kind of almost a bit bemused, like that same reaction that we often get,
Well,
and probably the only stand.
I think it's interesting, Philip, because I mean, we've seen places like, say, for example, in Tokyo, like Romperchichi, an old favorite of ours in Nakano, which opened 10 plus years ago, and they made a sort of a big effort to sort of attract the lunch crowd. I think for a couple reasons. One, you get maybe some of the non-jazz people to come in and spend some money and come back again if the food's good. And two, people are drinking less, so you're making less money on the alcohol that you probably used to sell. So as a business model, I think that we're probably going to see more and more of this type of thing.
Yeah, which also, I mean, reminds me of Dante that we talked about in Morioka as well, because actually when Tom and I were in there, the only other two customers were people who were having the lunch set. I mean, they might have been into jazz, but they weren't there specifically because it was a jazz kisa by any means. They were office workers who were on their lunch, So, I think if you remember correctly, as I was leaving, I shot something, again, one of those things that you see in Japan just hanging in a hallway and no one ever takes it or even dreams of removing it. But there's a very large, it's about your sort of size, actually, the big baggy T-shirts. It's a Cannonball Adderley T-shirt, and the quote says, "I hate crowds unless they're paying customers to see Cannonball." And I think you asked me to get you the T-shirt, not realizing it was just a bit of memorabilia hanging in a dusty stairwell.
I remember that, and I remember almost immediately texting you, just buy that and pay whatever, and I'll give it back to you because, as you know, I'm a huge Cannonball Adderley and I'm a huge jazz T-shirt fan. So that was I would have. I'll go back and check if it's still there, and I'll just make an offer for it. Why not?
I mean, it looks like it's been there for many, many years, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was happy enough to sell it to you. But anyway, so that was Mimosa Bird, which was, again, I think probably interesting purely from the point of view of, you go specifically to see somewhere like Uptown that we knew about and is kind of has a reputation as well known. And just in wandering and killing time, you're able to go around the corner and discover another place which, has this history and is part of this culture. And to me, that's amazing, right? Because what we're talking about here, okay, it's a big city, but it's also a regional city, right? And again, I think
big is very relative because it's
relative.
It's basically 450,000 people, and think of the equivalent size city in the States, in somewhere that's more, like you said, in the regions, there'll be like one at best jazz bar or music bar even. You know what I mean? And in Takamatsu, I remember when I was walking with my buddy there in the evening, we were going to grab a bite, and I saw this gigantic Jamaican flag, and I was like, "Oh, that's got to be a reggae joint." Sure enough, little reggae bar. Music, DJ events, jerk chicken, again, right around the corner from the jazz as well, So these regional cities in Japan always are packed with music bars, not just the jazz keys. It's just remarkable.
Yeah, it's incredible, but long may it continue. So by that point, I think we might have gone and grabbed some food actually, and by that point it was officially time for Uptown to open. So we returned to Uptown. So James, what to say about Uptown? I'm curious because we've both been there, but not together, and it sounds from your hints that we've had sort of interesting experiences, to say the least.
I would say that's understating it a little bit. Yes. Okay. The first thing would be, and this is in no way criticism. It's one of the things we love about the jazz kisaten. They sometimes can raise the art of clutter to levels that previously I've unexperienced with. Okay. Uptown would be in definitely the top 5 most cluttered spots. But again, because it's a regional place, it's not in Tokyo or Osaka, it's bigger. It's definitely much more of a bigger space. But when we came in, I couldn't even see where the owner was because the counters and the tables were all covered with stacks of books and records and CDs, and just even under one of the chairs at the counter were these gigantic jars of what I found out were umeshu, plum liquor. He makes his own plum liquor. We've seen that as well too a couple times, right? So imagine this place with all of these different things just visually. And then, again, it must be his daily ritual. He was reading the newspaper. I have it right here in the notes. Owner reading newspaper, speaks a little quirky, not sure I understood everything in Japanese, may be a little bit of strange dude. This is what I have in the notes. And then I've got triply underlined, He said to me in Japanese once I explained that, I loved going around to Kisaten and this, that, and the other. And he said in Japanese, in the local dialect, he said, Ossan akihen no? Which basically means like, aren't you tired of all these stinky old men? Which was a very funny thing to say because it's kind of self-deprecating because he himself is that age. And I said, oh, well, they're pretty good. And he's like, well, I'm one of the youngest owners and I'm in my 60s. And I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty funny. But slowly, as he started to talk, I started to get a feeling that this guy was definitely going off on his own direction. There was just something. And my friend, who's of course a native speaker and native to the region, was picking up on it as well because he was sort of elbowing me and giving me the side eye. And he's being like, this guy's a little quirky, man. And then when I finally got down to my usual, Philip, as you know, my usual Jazz Kisa Q&A mode with the notebook coming out. And I said, how long have you been open? I'm not joking. This was his answer. 30 fucking years. He says in really good English. And I was just like, wow, okay, because we've been speaking in Japanese the whole time, but I guess he thought that, bringing out the 30 fucking years would make it sound like kind of, I would appreciate the English. I thought it was pretty funny, if not a little bit unusual. His manner was just completely different to almost any owner I've ever met.
Yeah.
That's why I've got it underlined here. Friendly but quirky. Lives upstairs where he has more records. I'm not ordering the umeshu. As you know me, I ain't ordering any homebrew from these guys. So that was the extent of my notes. Yes, definitely a little bit memorable. But, we didn't stay long. I think we had a coffee. We talked a little bit of music. He did have some new albums, which was interesting. He had some more current releases on CD, plus the usual, rack of old records as well. But yeah, it was just something a little different about him that I didn't feel like we would want to stay for an hour sort of, talking music for that long.
Do you remember where you sat?
I sat at the counter by the front.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I wanted to tell you about this at the time, but I thought I'll save it for the podcast. I mean, as it turns out, that was didn't realize it was going to be 6 or 7 months down the line, but hey, look, we're busy. But I mean, I would say probably, look, we know the jazz Kisa owners, to do this full stop, right? You have to be eccentric, and we've talked about particular owners, people Basie's owner, Sugawara-san. We've talked about, Samurai's owner, and, even people like Hayashi-san who runs Candy. But this was, I would say, the first time. This guy was odd to me. It wasn't eccentric. He was just really odd. And I would say it's probably the first time I've really felt uncomfortable, actually. I felt quite uncomfortable being there. And I wanted to stay and talk and I wanted to photograph, but also I just wanted to leave because I left with such a weird feeling. So I'll set the scene. I mean, we came back, obviously, and he couldn't say, don't come in because, he was open. And he put us at this table at the window, backs to the window and looking down at the thing. And as you say, you didn't mention the grand piano either. So there's a grand piano in there too under all that clutter.
I forgot. Yes,
right.
That's right.
And it's got this, he actually told me it'd been open for 40 years, right? So, but so it has this kind of and it has this 80s feel. There's these silver, it's a silver counter. Some of the chairs are silver framed with kind of leather upholstery. And, so you can really pinpoint the kind of era. But it kind of started he it was all very what do you want to drink? And so we ordered a coffee and he brought that over and do you want milk? And the milk came in a little jug and all that sort of stuff. And then he kind of started to bring over these books, because I said, I'm actually just traveling around and, we've been up in Osaka and we're, blah, blah, blah. And when I told him about photographing, I think actually maybe I had my camera just sitting, he brought over these books, and one of them was this jazz, is it Jazz Kisa 69, I think, or Jazz Road 69 or something. So, and he was in that, right? So he'd been photographed before. So I thought, this is good. He's kind of showing me these and da-da-da-da. And so we chatted a bit more and he put on some music and it was just an oddness. And weirdly, he kind of sat at a table, but opposite, but about I don't know, 6 or 8 feet away. And sort of he just didn't seem comfortable at all. And he was kind of muttering. And anyway, then he came over to either get the books back or bring the books over. And I said, so would it be okay to take some photos? And he just looked at me and like cocked his head and stuck out his tongue. And I was so... but
in what what manner? With like as a joke or as a like sure?
Well,
like,
this was the thing. It was so weird, right? And we know, like, I mean, sticking out a tongue in Japan's quite rude, right?
Yeah.
So
yes.
I was so taken aback, and I just and so I had exactly the question you just asked. I was like, "Is this a joke?" And then I just sort of kind of went, dame desu ka? Is it not okay? And he just sort of did it again. And then he just walked off and sat at the table. And I was so kind of shocked. And obviously I was with Julie and I was like, oh, this is like not a thing that happens in Japan in particular, like this kind of gesture. And it's just, and I was so thrown by the whole thing. And I just thought it was so unusual compared to any other experience like we've had. And we often say, I mean, there was the one place where, I don't know if it was necessarily us, but they didn't want anyone taking any photos of this place, right, or whatever, in Tokyo. But this is the first time where it's been like a direct refusal from the owner, particularly in this kind of place, like not a more modern, hipper kind of place. And I just was so completely taken aback, and it just made everything feel very uncomfortable. And I do wonder, I mean, having observed and spoken with him, I do wonder, was there an element of sort of maybe cognitive decline or something? Like something didn't feel like, oh, this guy's an eccentric. It just felt like he was really...
That's really okay.
A bit odd,
That's interesting, Philip. This is interesting for a lot of reasons, but I'm thinking. Okay, so like I said in the notes, I'd written down that the guy seemed quirky and eccentric. I think one reason being that I was with a Japanese person, a local, perhaps that sort of made him a little more relaxed, even though I could speak Japanese, but it wasn't quite the same thing as you and Julie walking in and then you pull the camera out. I mean, that's obviously a different vibe for him, perhaps. But I'm wondering, because the like you said, the world of the jazz kissa is out. It's outside mainstream life in Japan. Always has been, and so it's attracted people who are more individualistic or quirky or eccentric, artistic, whatever you want to say. You know what I mean? But yeah, I totally can understand that feeling, because I think that maybe there was something. Now he didn't strike me as being that old. But of course that doesn't necessarily have any relation to whatever condition he may have. But you mentioned, about sticking your tongue out. It is rude in Japanese culture. It's something that you do. It's something that kids usually do, where you'll stick your tongue out and you pull one eye down, and it's sort of just like, it's like when we say like na 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 or something like that. And
that's exactly the feeling of what it was. The way he kind of did that, and just to be clear, like I'm not
for a grown up to do.
Very odd, very, very odd. The whole thing was very odd. Not least, of course, as well. Like, I mean, he's running a cafe. It's not like I stopped some guy in the street and said, "Can I take your photo?" I mean, like, I'm in here as a paying customer. And just to be clear, like, I'm not suggesting, oh, well, he wouldn't let me take photographs, so there must be cognitive decline. I mean, I have people in my family who are suffering that kind of thing. So I understand, like, you can see certain signs, right? There's certain things, just even the way that someone interacts and the way that he was kind of even just by himself, like when he was just sitting at the table and we were just having coffee and chatting to each other, and he was, there's just an element of like, this man is just not at ease, like with himself in the way that he was kind of behaving, and it was just a very strange experience. And kind of, I mean, and look, you can take things personally, and obviously it's not, and I think but I think it's also, it took me a while, like as we're driving to the next place, to just be like, you're kind of just processing it, because you're like, we're so used to coming out of places just like totally buzzing, or being like, wow, that was weird, but like you never really experienced that feeling of coming out feeling like a bit sort of like uncomfortable and sort of awkward, and like, okay, it's not the end of the world, right? But it's so unusual in the kind
Philip,
of lived experience we've had of it,
I've just flipped pages of my diary. I do have one more
Here we go.
from my buddy. So he said to me after we left, I've got it scrawled in here, and I was probably writing as we walked, but it says, Master's Japanese was a little strange. Now, he said this to me before I said anything. So that was his impression, again, and as somebody who's local, so who understands the dialect. And so I think that, look, you and I both speak Japanese, but I would hardly say that we're fluent. And sometimes nuance or tone can be a little bit tricky because you're concentrating so hard on just making sure you get all the vocabulary. You know what I mean? Especially when you're, in a loud cafe, there's music playing, and, you're kind of on like, we're on documentary mode. You know what I mean? So you don't want to lose anything. But sometimes that sort of feeling of personality or the way tone comes out in Japanese goes over my head, at least. So the fact that my buddy just mentioned it immediately, it was sort of like, oh, okay, so there was something a little bit different about this dude and the way that he talked. So, but yeah, I'm really curious to know if any of I know a lot of our listeners are like us and they've been to Japan and traveled around. Now, Uptown's not exactly, a major spot on the map, nor is Shikoku, but if anybody listening has been there, please do let us know what your experiences were. And I'm going to get on right away tomorrow, Philip, to the to the Japanese Jazz Kisa group on Facebook, which has thousands of members, most of whom are Japanese. And I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to be like, hey, has anybody been to Uptown in Takamatsu? Because I've noticed that the dialogue on there is pretty free. People tend to give their stories, the kind of stories that you and I tell in English. A lot of them will share that, like, oh yeah, that guy was really crazy, or he was really drunk that night. You know what I mean? They don't tend to hold back on their opinions of the Jazz Kisa. So I'd be curious to know if anybody else has been there and had a similar, experience or impression. But it's certainly the most odd. Well, is it a non-refusal? Did he actually say do not take photos, or did he just do that and sit down?
Well, I mean, not in so many words, but I mean, it was very clear. Like, I mean, there was no way I was going to sort of be like either. And, this has also been one of the challenges of the project, which, isn't a challenge we've really had to deal with. But, I snapped a couple of pictures when he went out the back, but obviously I wouldn't use those or put those on the site or anything like that because, that's part of the deal as far as I'm concerned is, like it's done with access that we negotiate, it's done with permission. And if someone says no, then I wouldn't, take photos and share them. They were just purely for my own reference in terms of being able to talk about this place. And, look, all the experiences we have, even turning up to places, that are closed and so on, is all part of this kind of experience and the adventure of the project. So like it wasn't the end of the world, and it was kind of disappointing because it was a really nice place and very photogenic. So it would have been great to been able to photograph it. And also having known that it was photographed before, you think, well, it should be fine. But then again, like, who knows what that experience was like, I mean, for other, and I'm not casting any shade on any other photographers, but, it was in this jazz, I think it's Jazz Kisa 16 or Jazz Road. I think it's Jazz Road 16 or Jazz Kisa. And there was a couple that actually he was in. So who knows, right? Maybe that was something that he agreed to, and then photos were taken he didn't like, or, like he didn't like the experience or something. So, there's no context for it, but it was just so... it was just so unusual to the normal experience.
It's funny. I'm looking back on my photos from July 2021, and I took a whole bunch, but just quick ones on my phone. Maybe he wasn't even aware that I was doing it. And there is one really great one. Do you remember his very large vacuum tube amplifier that was on the counter? And, I was there in the summer, so you can imagine how hot it was. And he had a little white fan, actually not that little, about the size of the amp, just sitting right next to it, just keeping it cool, which I'd never seen before either. But, again, it's really hot down south. So, I mean, he clearly, looking back at the pictures again, the sheer amount of music that he had in there was pretty impressive. I mean, he had so much old vinyl, but baskets and baskets. Do you remember? He had about 10 of these big white baskets full of like contemporary jazz CDs as well, which you don't always see in a lot of kissa. So definitely musically it was really interesting. But I mean, yeah, the clutter, the grand piano, which, I there's a reason I forgot it. When you look at the picture, you can barely see it. I mean, it's just stacked with stuff on top of it. So
I just looking at my photos.
Odd place.
Just looking at my photos, actually, well, that was 1:20, so it must have been 1:00 he opened, which kind of really dragged the day back a bit because, where I was hoping to go in, have a coffee and head on. The two books, it was Shikoku Jazz Road was the first book, actually, and then the other one was Jazz, let's see, Portrait in Jazz Kissa 69. So, so it was Nihon Jazz Kissa 69 or one of those books. So there was actually two books, and I think he was in both of them. So he had this experience, but then again, like, who knows when that was. And I also in the toilet managed to snap a very nice, very snazzy toilet roll cover, which is sort of padded and embroidered. And I think, is that Thelonious Monk in sort of embroidery? I don't know, but there's a trumpet anyway, and then a picture of what I suspect is Thelonious Monk. It's hard to tell. I'll put that on the Instagram if anyone's got any ideas who that is.
He had a really cool thing on one wall. Looking back on the pics here, it's sort of almost a graffiti style mural,
like a mural.
And it's 52nd Street in New York, like in the 40s. And 50s. It's got like a picture of like the Onyx Club and a sort of figure playing a saxophone. So you can see like the place has like a lot of really interesting things going on. It's just that, I mean, I would hope that it's maybe it is just a quirkiness thing. I hope that he's not, actually suffering from something that we're not able or qualified to diagnose. But yeah, definitely one of the more memorable. That was not the story I was expecting, Philip. I have to say, you've
it could be
surprised me with this one, because I was expecting something very different.
It could just be that Jazz Kissa broke him. Who knows? I mean, it's funny because the trail sort of gets warm again in the final place that I'm going to chat about today, actually. So we'll have a little call back to Uptown to finish up. But look, talking about disappointment, once we left Takamatsu, we kind of headed around the coast road to a place called Mitoyo, which again, I suspect it's one of those places you probably wouldn't go ordinarily, but you follow the coast road round and you get there, and there's a place by the roadside, which I suppose is sort of a combination of some of the other places. It's called Accent, and the short story is it was closed, but it was in quite a new house, but almost like a Swingville place that we talked about recently. It was kind of on the roadside, felt like quite coffee and cake, probably nice curry set or something for lunch, or probably homemade food. Maybe someone's retired, rebuilt their house, opened this place. It was that kind of joint. But
it even looks a little bit like one of the retired jazz fan salarymen opens a place in their house, like a little Brooklyn in Chiba or a Slow Boat. Like from the pictures that you could see online, it sort of has that same sort of style to it, Yeah,
so, they have a very big sign on the sort of main pillar that looks out of the house, that looks out onto the street, which says Accent, why Hirano plays, like it's sort of a mock-up record label, and it has the track listing is coffee, track 2 sandwiches, track 3 lunch, track 4 juice, and track 5 dessert. So there you go.
It's huge. I mean, it's huge, actually.
It's huge, and I think it's a house upstairs because you can see like there's curtains and so on. Now the sign on the door said it was closed that day, but to be honest, it felt like it was closed. Not necessarily for good, but it didn't feel like it was just a take UB. It felt like it's definitely sort of maybe it had been closed for a bit, or it was going to reopen, in the sort of summer season or something. I don't know. But anyway, look, we've passed it, photographed outside, and we have a record of it. So, who knows, at some point we may get back to it. But that brings me to the final place today, James, which is one of those places where I just... like I'm just going to put my heart on the line. I'm just going to wear my heart on my sleeve, James. I'm going to say I just missed you being there, and that's no shade on Julie, but like it was one of those places where you walk in and you are like, what the actual hell is this? Like, it is just an unbelievable place. So basically, it's in a town called Imabari, which again, probably not a town that you'd necessarily be in unless you were looking for something specific. It took ages to try and find a place to park. Ended up somewhere like the city hall had free parking. Walked back round and walked into this place called Maniana. Now, I hadn't twigged that what that actually, because I was, Maniana, like what is it to do with mania, like being manic about collecting? Of course, what it actually was mañana. It was a katakana version of mañana, like the Spanish for tomorrow, right? So only when the owner explained that, I was like, oh, mañana, okay. It's like, I was like, mañana. Anyway, this place, James, like, you just can't. You can't. I'm going to just send you. I'm going to send you a picture right now of what it looks like, and tell me what other kind of space you think it reminds you of, because straight away this kind of bright green conjures up a totally different place.
Philip, I know what you're going to send me already, because coincidentally, a couple months ago, a friend of mine who was traveling down south sent me a very similar picture. Yes, it's okay. How would we say this? Well, it
looks like a casino. It looks like a casino, right?
I was just gonna say our American friends, any of our American audience friends listening will know that kind of like green that you see in casino tables in Vegas. So imagine you've got that as your counter, but the rest of the decor is some combination of antique kitsch shop and like U.S. diner. That's basically how I would say it.
It's a staggering place. It's a staggering place.
Shockingly full of stuff. You know what I mean? Just like tons.
But you would appreciate the outside too, because it actually, on the outside, it actually uses the word shop, which I know you love, but it actually says Jazz Shop Mañana. And when you go in, like you say, it's actually a circular. So there's about 10 seats. So when you go into this place, the roof feels low. It's one of those places the roof feels low. There is this circular green, like bright green, like snooker table green or pool, billiard table green counter that is in the round. And there's like 10 seats around that. And that's it. There's nowhere else to sit. And then there's the speakers, obviously. The walls are completely covered with pictures. A lot of the old owner, actually, and different kinds of like memorabilia. The roof has stuff on it. And then there's 2 big speakers. And the owner, who was just the loveliest, most gracious lady, because I'd stuck my head in initially to say, hi, I've come here to visit this place, but I can't park my car. Do you know where I can park my car? So she sent me to the city hall. So I came back. So she was kind of expecting us back, and we came in. And my regret is just that I didn't I didn't photograph the whole space more quickly, because actually very soon after that, a couple of customers came in, and inevitably in a place like that, you just can't. Like, you can't not talk to each other. So, of course, then we started up the conversation. Oh, where are you from? Oh, Ireland. Oh, what are you doing here? And, oh, why do you speak Japanese? And and we chatted. And anyway, apparently, some of the sort of things I picked up was that it's been there 60 years. It was owned by this original owner who opened it, and he was inspired by Charlie Mariano. That was all I got. He then obviously died, and actually sorry to interrupt, but Charlie Mariano, of course, was married to Akio Shitoshiko, the great Japanese pianist. So he was extremely famous here, probably at that time period that the owner would have opened the joint. Yeah. So he opened that place, and she was a customer who took it over basically to keep it open, because it has very much, again, this local, and this is where you have this kind of intersection with like jazz kisa and just a local coffee shop, because a lot of these towns, don't necessarily have these places, and you go to them and they don't have all the choice that you maybe expect from bigger Japanese cities. And 2 or 3 people came in. It was very much like you didn't order anything. Your usual just got slid across the counter. And the owner herself was like, look, I was not a massive jazz fan. Like, I'm sort of learning. And she was putting on his records, and she's kind of like taught herself.
We've heard that many times, from the people who've taken them over, that they learned through the collection that was already there, Philip, there is a website It's not a shop affiliated website. It's a profile of the place. But
Right.
it heavily features pictures of what I assume is the original owner. But this is about 10
Yes.
years ago, so before he passed on. And Philip, again, the sheer amount of stuff in here, like it looks
it's
like
unreal.
laser. Is it like laser discs that are hanging from the ceiling? There's plastic fruit. There's looks like an Ultraman doll at one part hanging over the ceiling, and then a whole wall of like magazines and CDs. And for whatever
when
reason,
you go in on the left, there's
a whole bunch
go in
of
on the
American
left, there's a big
license plates as well. Like
Yes, that's
before.
right.
Sometimes
That's right.
the older Japanese guys love that American car culture. So he's got a couple, like one from Alabama. I mean, it's like where would he even gotten this? You know?
Yeah, that's right. On the left-hand side, when you go in, there's a whole really nicely kept like rack of like there's a couple of portraits of the owner, but there's a lot of magazines and like jazz magazines and things like that. And there's like Brutus and other stuff like that. So like it's definitely a space that people are going in and having their afternoon or morning coffee and chatting and reading the newspaper. It's got that feel to it, and from outside, I mean, again, it looks like it just looks like a shack, right? I mean, it's got that sort of Garo. I mean, it's just unreal. Like, how is it even standing still?
Yeah. It's just great. I mean, it's just, there's not another jazz kissa that looks like this. It looks like a thrift store or Japanese version of a thrift / antique store that may serve coffee. Yeah. But then you look in between all of this bric-a-brac, you see the wall of CDs and the vinyl and a couple jazz posters as well. And even some, what looked to seem some pretty deep albums, but also a bunch of new releases as well. I see he's got like some of the Philip, that must have been your corner there, Nora Jones and Diana Krall. Yes. They knew that you were coming. And also, always up for this. That kind of like LED clock, the kind you see that like, it's like you see it like in the airport or like in the stock exchange, like the really big bright letters and numbers. I think Umi and Saitama had one of those for reasons completely unknown, but it looks like Maniana has one of those too. And from the photo, it looks really bright as well. So it's
unbelievable. It was just
everything about the place looks crazy.
It's just one of those places, and interestingly, a part of this conversation then got around to, well, what are you doing? And like, why are you here? And, what places have you been to? And me also trying to figure out like, sorry, what are these other places and so on and so forth. And actually then, of course, Uptown came up. So, and this made me feel slightly better because the sort of analysis of Uptown as far as this customer was concerned was basically "Anoshito yaruki ga nakunatta," which translates roughly as basically that guy's given up the ghost, like he doesn't have the will to do it anymore. Which may be a conscious thing, maybe because of his situation, who knows? But it was kind of interesting to me that was already the kind of sense that they had of that Uptown, which is not necessarily close,
Yeah,
so,
but
like, as we know, there is.
But these people, the regulars that we meet, especially, say if they're living in Imabari in Shikoku, but they'll likely get up to Takamatsu or down to Matsuyama or wherever, and they'll visit some of these places. So word would get around.
It spreads, for sure.
It's very interesting. And Philip, I don't know if I'm sure we have talked about this a little bit, but I think it's one thing that's interesting is that when we talk with what they call in Japanese the joren-san, the regulars, the people who are regulars of the place, we found like a mixed thing. Sometimes like you've got that very sort of formal sort of politeness of, oh, you guys, your Japanese is so good. Oh, your project's amazing. You have like that conversation, which we've had a million times, and it's quite boring. But sometimes you might start talking, you have a couple drinks, and I think this is definitely the case when you get outside of the bigger cities. People are just a little bit more straightforward. And we have, I think, the advantage of, look, sometimes being a foreigner in Japan is a great disadvantage, but sometimes it's also a great advantage because people will open up to you because who cares if I tell you what I really feel? You're a foreigner anyway. You don't know me. You don't know my circle. I don't have to adhere to rather strict social sort of, manner that a lot of people in Japanese society have to do so. So I know that over the years, I've had some of the most, if not the most, open, honest, direct, and sometimes shocking conversations in jazz cafes with people that I just met, where they would very openly give your opinion on something controversial, whether it's politics or even music. They'll argue about music. And Philip, you lived here 20 years. You know that Japan's not an arguing place. People just don't do it. You know what I mean? Generally, compared to especially where we come from, But I found that there's something about that freedom in the jazz Kisa world where people really do sort of like, oh, you know what, we can talk openly. And that goes doubly true when they're talking to somebody who is basically a foreigner. So that I think that's interesting that they would, you're right within the conversation. You say you went to Uptown, and then they'll immediately give like a very honest, because frankly, that's a rather sharp comment in the Japanese context.
But I suppose, and I suppose also that, maybe we romanticize it as this, like, we're all in this kind of jazz world together, and we're all working towards some sort of imaginary goal. But the reality is these places are businesses, and probably, like, certainly at one time were competitive for customers as well. So, you have to also factor that kind of jealousy and competitiveness in. And like we all know, like even smaller cities, that I've lived in, there's maybe one or two, there's kind of like two, like, say, soul clubs, and they're kind of don't mix and don't cross-pollinate. And like, you think, well, why, if you both, if you all love soul music or you all love swing music or whatever it might be, why would you not all just sort of, but that's just the nature of things, right? And music scenes tend to be cliquey, and they tend to be kind of competitive. And so there could be an element of that. And what was really interesting about that is not Uptown, but actually, and again, in this city, which, Imabari, not a lot there. Like, I'll be honest, not a lot there at all. Mm-hmm. But three doors down, there's another jazz kisa called Jug.
I did not know that. In Imabari City, really?
On the same street. Like, it is literally 3 or 4 doors down. I said to them,
wow, okay.
And I said to them, because I was asking them about other places, right? On Shikoku, and weirdly they didn't mention Jug. And so I said, and the sign says Jazz and Coffee Jug, and then it has Jug in katakana as well. And the sign was just, like the lit up sign was sitting in the doorway, so it wasn't like it was closed forever. I can't remember. I think it was closed that day, which is why I didn't. I would have probably considered coming back in the evening, but like I just was trying to also balance like having a bit of a holiday and not driving like, excessive amounts, just, whatever. But when I mentioned Jug, I said, oh, and this place Jug, like down the thing, and they were like, oh yeah, they open at 5. And then there was just this kind of like tumbleweed moment, where like it was just like, like the wind blew in, and I was like, oh, okay, so you're not all working towards the same jazz goal, clearly. And which, it was fascinating, right? So who knows what's going on there. So, but the fact that those two places were next to each other, probably makes sense in the 60s or whatever, but like the fact that they're both still there and both still going in this very down a hill kind of regional city.
I got to get down to Imabari. I'm just looking it up now, and I'm seeing a couple of comments about Jug from just a few months ago. And then there's even one strangely enough, there's one in English. No, it's still no auto-translate. Sorry. Yeah. This one's in Japanese from just 1 week ago. So they're definitely still open. And the pictures look great, man. It looks amazing. It looks a little bit of a what's our place in Fukuoka? Little Jab.
Oh,
that
Jab.
Kind of like,
yeah. It's got that same vibe, yeah, for sure.
Little bit of that vibe where coffee and kind of a little bit of a lunch thing. So I think. I feel like getting on a plane right now down to Imabari. But wow, it does look, but the city looks rather run down, doesn't it? Wow.
Yeah, it's staggering that these two places were there. Anyway, look, I took some photos of the outside and put a pin in it for the next time. So, look, that was Shikoku, and then obviously I stayed on there for another night. That evening I went to Dogo Onsen and stayed there in a really nice place, and then continued that journey.
Did you eat the tangerine ice cream? I'm judging from your silence. You did not eat the tangerine ice cream.
I'm just trying to. I don't know. I did have like a local beer, but I don't know. I don't know about the ice cream.
It's literally the most famous food product from that part of the country. Everything is Mikan. You do have Mikan beer, Mikan ice cream. Mikan is tangerine in Japanese. So I'm guessing maybe you didn't somehow avoided it, but okay. But you at least
we did get there quite late in the evening. Maybe it wasn't a night for ice cream, but
and you had a Dogo beer though, because it's a great local brewery. So that's good.
Yeah. And then look, we're going to pick it up in episode 62. Again, we're going to focus on two places, but I have to say probably one of them is in my top three, as I said before. So I reckon we've got a lot to say about that. You've been there, and then there's one other place that I went round to that I think you haven't been to yet. So that's going to be a really nice way to wrap up this most recent trip and the Shikoku leg. But before we do that, I just wanted to give a shout out to Afonso, because you know I love it. I love a vindication, James. So I just got a message from Alfonso today, actually, on Instagram, who said that, first of all, he said he was delighted to hear us talking about Shimoya-san at Jazzya last week, because apparently he used to have jazz classes there. And he described him as, and I quote, the classic Osaka Oji-san, but with jazz. So there you go. But more importantly than that,
very nice. Yeah.
The first message that came through was a picture of a ship's wheel, and the message, the tanuki was pretty tall. So there you go. So there you go. I knew it was bigger than this little tiny ornament you were describing.
What can I say? As a 6'2", 183 centimeter tall man, sometimes those things look a little small to me. What can I say?
Fair enough. Look, James, we're going to chat about the book and the whole second edition Whirlwind next week, but we've already hit the 60-minute mark and gone beyond. So my beer glass is empty and something else is full. So I would believe that's a good time for us to wrap up. No PR today. You know where to find the other greatest podcast that exists online. It's called the OK Jazz Podcast, episode number 166. I thought you were talking about The Guardian. Sorry.
It's already there. No, Philip, I've saved a lot of those stories too, which if you did listen to my other show, you'd know I had a very interesting visit to Southern California, and I put together a little music mix. So if you dig...
Just loading it up as we speak. It's
rather impossible since I'm recording it tomorrow, but okay. It'll be there by the time. Remember that 2-week time thing? Remember? So.
Yep.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
Talk to you soon,
that
buddy.
Note, all right. Good to talk to you, man. See you in episode 62.
You bet. Ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye.